A powerful and dangerous storm system is closing in, and the threat it carries is not something you want to sleep on this week. Millions of people across the central and eastern United States are in the crosshairs of a weather pattern that is about to deliver severe thunderstorms, destructive winds, large hail, and a tornado threat that could turn significant depending on how the atmosphere responds in the coming hours. And that is only the beginning of the story. Layered on top of that active storm threat is a strengthening heat dome expanding out of the west and pressing deep into the central United States, fueling repeated rounds of dangerous weather through the entire week ahead. At the same time, wildfires are raging along the west coast, pumping smoke across the country, and there is at least a low chance of a tropical system developing in the western Atlantic with a potential eye toward the east coast. August is opening with a volatile and dangerous pattern that deserves your full attention right now. Let's walk through everything that is set to unfold across the country over the coming days, because this is a layered and complex setup with several moving pieces that all matter for your safety and your plans. Before we get into the day-by-day breakdown, let's take a step back and understand what is driving all of this. The key to this entire week starts with the mid-level wind pattern across the country, and right now the pattern is extremely active. At this moment, there is a fairly strong low-pressure system making its way across the Ohio Valley. This is the same system that was responsible for severe weather activity in the region just yesterday. We did see at least one tornado touchdown in eastern Indiana, and tornado warnings were issued across a wide area, including the Indianapolis metro and points south near Cincinnati. While that outbreak was somewhat active in terms of rotating storms and warnings, the actual damage was minimal. Storms struggled to truly separate from one another and produce the kind of long-track, organized supercell activity that leads to widespread destruction. It was a day characterized more by clusters of rotating thunderstorms than anything else. That same storm system today is shifting its influence toward the East Coast, and that matters for millions of people right now. We have strong low to mid-level winds stretching in a corridor that runs all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, northward into western New York, and that wind corridor is the fuel that could allow severe weather to develop and sustain itself today. If you're on the East Coast today, you need to understand what you are dealing with. Thunderstorms are already developing and will continue throughout the day, with activity expected to persist from early this morning all the way through the late afternoon and early evening hours. The peak window for the most intense and organized severe weather today is between 2 and 10 in the evening. That is your primary danger period, and you need to have a way to receive warnings during those hours. Now let's be honest about what kind of severe weather threat this actually is, because context matters here. This is not going to be a highly organized or textbook severe weather event. The setup shares a lot of similarities with what we saw yesterday in the Ohio Valley, where storms were tightly clustered together and struggled to breathe and separate from one another. The dominant threat today is going to be damaging wind gusts from these storm clusters. If you live in this corridor, from Atlanta up through the mid-Atlantic and into the northeast, that is your primary concern today, damaging straight-line winds embedded in squall lines and clusters of thunderstorms moving through. That said, if one or two individual supercells manage to separate themselves from the main cluster activity, we cannot rule out an isolated tornado. The ingredients are there to a degree, and if conditions allow for storm separation, the tornado threat becomes a real possibility. But broadly speaking, damaging winds are what you are most likely to experience. For the timing of storm activity today, storms will be approaching areas like Syracuse, Binghamton, and Scranton as we move toward the 6 to 8 in the evening range. If you live in or near those cities, plan accordingly and make sure your weather alerts are active before you head into the late afternoon. As we get into the overnight hours, the severe weather threat should gradually wind down, though a strong cluster of thunderstorms will still be capable of producing gusty and potentially damaging winds as it pushes toward eastern Pennsylvania and southern New York. The activity does not shut off cleanly, so do not let your guard down the moment the prime time window passes. There is also a significant rainfall concern today that deserves its own spotlight. We are looking at very heavy rainfall totals for portions of Pennsylvania and New York. Locations like State College and areas near Williamsport are expected to see 2 to 3 inches of rain from today's activity alone, and isolated spots could pick up as much as 5 to 7 inches. That is a substantial amount of water falling in a relatively short period of time. It creates a serious flash flood threat for low-lying areas and any location near streams and creeks that are already running high. If you are in these areas today, please take the flood threat seriously. Turn around, do not drown. If you encounter flooded roadways, do not attempt to drive through them under any circumstances. No destination is worth risking your life. If you live in a low-lying area, stay on high alert throughout the day and into the overnight hours. Looking ahead to Monday, this current storm system will begin to weaken. You will see more showers and thunderstorms moving across the northeast on Monday. But the severe weather threat from this particular system is not what I am most focused on for that day. In fact, the organized severe weather risk on Monday from the system is quite limited. The atmosphere is going to be somewhat stabilized by the significant rainfall occurring today, which acts as a capping mechanism that suppresses the kind of explosive storm development we would need for widespread severe weather. On top of that, the moisture in place is simply not impressive for this time of year. Instability values are running around 500 joules per kilogram, which is very modest for late July or early August. When you pair that with dew points that are only sitting in the low to mid-60s, you have an atmosphere that feels more like a spring setup than a summer severe weather event. The temperature and dew point spread, roughly 10 to 15 degrees, could be enough to support some tornado potential, but the threshold is going to be very close. For any tornado threat to materialize on Monday in the Northeast, temperatures would need to be lower or moisture would need to be higher than what is currently being forecast. Stay tuned for updates as Monday approaches. Flooding is still the primary concern for the Northeast on Monday, not severe thunderstorms. Now, here is where the real story of this week begins, and this is what I want you to pay very close attention to. While this weakening storm system wraps up its run through the East Coast, an entirely different and much more intense low-pressure system is approaching from Canada and is set to impact the northern plains on Monday. This is a very intense low-pressure system, and the wind fields associated with it are going to be powerful. Strong low-level winds will be in place across Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And the combination of those strong winds with whatever moisture is available in the region could support a significant tornado threat. I do want to give you an honest and balanced picture of this situation, though, because there is meaningful uncertainty in this setup. One of the potential limiting factors is moisture. The northern plains can sometimes be what we call moisture-starved, meaning there simply is not enough humidity in the lower atmosphere to support robust, tall thunderstorm development and tornado activity. If DW points end up being too low, cloud bases will be elevated, and an elevated cloud base makes it much harder for tornadoes to reach the ground even when rotating supercells are present. So there's a real possibility here that even with strong wind fields and an intense low-pressure system, the tornado threat could end up being more limited than it might initially appear. However, if the atmosphere manages to pull together enough moisture, the tornado threat on Monday in Minnesota, eastern North Dakota, and South Dakota could turn significant. That is not a word I use lightly. When we say significant tornado threat, we are talking about the potential for strong, long-track tornadoes capable of causing serious damage. If you live in any of these states, you need to be aware that Monday could be a dangerous day and have a plan in place for severe weather. Know where your safe place is. Know how you will receive warnings. Do not wait until storms are on top of you to figure out your plan. The timing for storm development on Monday in this region looks to be around 5 to 6 in the evening near Grand Forks and just north of Fargo, with storms spreading into northern Minnesota from there. There could be a very significant wind and hail threat associated with these storms, regardless of how the tornado question resolves itself. One of the models is currently placing the highest concentration of rotating supercells right along the Minnesota-Canadian border near International Falls. If the tornado threat does materialize at its highest potential, the most dangerous activity may actually end up occurring just across the border into Canada. As we move into the late evening and overnight hours on Monday, the setup looks to weaken into a more linear band of thunderstorms moving toward Duluth. That transition from discrete supercells to a squall line type setup usually means the tornado threat decreases, but the wind threat can remain significant. And at this point in the forecast, I want to take just a moment to pause because this is genuinely exciting, severe weather potential, and I think it is important to stay tuned to updates as we get closer to Monday. For Tuesday, the storm system that drove all of Monday's activity will have moved eastward, and at this point, the severe weather threat for most of the country eases. There will still be some showers and thunderstorms across the Midwest and Central Plains on Tuesday, with an elevated hailstorm risk possible in areas like Iowa and Nebraska. But I am not currently looking at a meaningful tornado threat for Tuesday, and the overall severe weather risk appears modest. If anything changes with that assessment, we will let you know as things develop. Wednesday is a day that deserves more attention, and I want to make sure you are aware of this if you live in the Midwest. A couple of the deterministic weather models, including the GFS, are indicating the development of a potentially significant line of thunderstorms beginning in Iowa and sweeping toward Chicago and southern Wisconsin. If this scenario plays out the way some models suggest, we could be talking about a very significant squall line with damaging winds, and perhaps some tornado potential embedded within it. That said, I want to be very clear that we are still several days out from Wednesday, and there is no well-defined, organized low-pressure system locked in as the primary driver of this event right now. That means the forecast can and will change before then. There is genuine model uncertainty at this range. But if you live in the Midwest and have plans on Wednesday, specifically in Iowa, northern Illinois, or southern Wisconsin, this is something you want to monitor closely over the coming days. Do not ignore this. Do not assume it will fizzle out, but also do not panic, because it may look very different by the time we get closer. Thursday shifts the focus back toward the Central Plains. The same weak low-pressure system that may drive Wednesday's Midwest activity will drift into the Ohio Valley by Thursday, and at that point, the Ohio Valley itself may not see much in the way of organized severe weather. Instead, eyes should be on the Central Plains for a potential line of thunderstorms or two that could carry a significant wind risk, and perhaps an isolated tornado threat. This is not a day I am extremely concerned about at this range, but it is worth keeping on the radar if you live in Kansas, Nebraska, or Oklahoma. As we head into next weekend, the picture becomes increasingly uncertain, as you would expect at that forecast range. I'm not seeing any widespread, organized, severe weather setups for the weekend at this point, but I am watching the northern plains, Midwest, and Great Lakes region for scattered showers and thunderstorms. While any one of those storm days could produce a locally significant severe weather event. August severe weather in these regions has historically been variable. In many recent years, it has been quiet, but there have also been years with major severe weather outbreaks in August. As this month unfolds, especially if you live in the northern plains, Midwest Ohio Valley, or Great Lakes, you want to stay connected to your forecasts and keep an eye on how the pattern evolves into mid-August. Now let's shift to the temperature story because this is a dramatic one, and the contrast across the country right now is striking. While the East Coast and Ohio Valley are going to experience genuinely pleasant conditions heading into Monday, with temperatures in the 70s and 80s in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York City, the situation is completely different across the central and southern plains. Dallas is forecast to be near 106 degrees on Monday. That is a dangerous heat level that can be life-threatening, especially for vulnerable populations, including the elderly, young children, and anyone who works or exercises outdoors. Fargo, North Dakota, which is also in the path of that storm system, is going to see very hot temperatures as well, despite being so far north. The heat dome expanding from the west is going to be the dominant climate story for the central United States throughout this week. By Tuesday, the southern plains will remain brutal with triple-digit heat in places like Dallas and Oklahoma City. The Midwest and northern plains will see some modest cooling as the Monday storm system moves through. By Wednesday, Iowa should be somewhat cooler with temperatures back into the 70s and 80s, but Dallas and Oklahoma City will still be baking in triple-digit heat. The East Coast will continue to see a mix of 70s, 80s, and 90s through the rest of the week. By the end of the week, the most extreme heat is expected to be concentrated in the central and southern plains, as well as the West Coast. That West Coast heat situation is directly connected to another major story developing right now, and it is a serious one. The West Coast has been enduring an extremely dry summer, and that dryness, combined with persistent heat, has created the conditions for catastrophic wildfires. Major wildfires have been burning across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and the situation has been described as brutal by any measure. Just recently, Spokane, Washington experienced a major wildfire on the north side of the city. Looking at the vertically integrated smoke maps, the scale of what is happening along the West Coast is striking. Massive plumes of wildfire smoke are exploding into the atmosphere and being carried eastward by the prevailing winds. If you live in the Great Plains or the Midwest and you have noticed hazy skies recently, this is exactly why. That smoke is making its way across the Rockies and spreading over a huge portion of the country. For most locations east of the Rockies, this is primarily going to manifest as hazy skies rather than a dangerous air quality situation. The near-surface smoke concentrations will create some air quality concerns specifically for the northern plains, but a widespread dangerous air quality event for major cities further east is not expected at this time. However, that situation could change if the fires continue to grow and expand into next week. This is worth monitoring if you live anywhere in the central part of the country. And finally, let's talk briefly about the tropics, because there is at least a low probability system being watched in the western Atlantic that carries a potential for impacting the East Coast. The confidence in this particular development is low right now, so we are not going to overstate the threat. But it is on the radar, and we will be providing updates on this as the pattern evolves. If you live along the East Coast, you are already dealing with a very active weather week from the storm system and the rainfall threat, and the tropics are one more element that deserves monitoring in the days ahead. This is a week where staying informed is genuinely important. Whether you're in the path of Monday's severe weather threat in Minnesota and the Dakotas, dealing with today's flood risk in Pennsylvania and New York, watching the heat in Dallas and the southern plains, or just trying to understand what the hazy skies above you are all about, knowledge is your best protection. Make sure your weather apps are updated and your alerts are turned on. Have a plan for your household if a tornado warning is issued. Know your evacuation route if flash flooding threatens your area. These simple steps can make the difference in a week that is shaping up to be genuinely active and in some places dangerous. Thank you so much for spending this time watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, this is exactly what we do here. We break down complex and significant weather patterns into forecasts you can actually use to protect yourself and your family. Hit that subscribe button below and turn on notifications so you never miss a critical update, especially during active weather weeks like this one. We will be back in the studio around Wednesday or Thursday with a full update on how the pattern is evolving, and if there is a significant, severe weather event before then, we will be live and ready to cover it. Stay weather aware, stay safe, and we will see you in the next video.